Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. In Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, a judge who is subject to U.S. sanctions, has won the presidential election by landslide. According to the preliminary results, Raisi received over 17.8 million votes, followed by Mohsen Rezai with 3.3 million. Conceding defeat, all other candidates have congratulated Raisi. Prime Minister Imran Khan says Pakistan will not allow the US to use its military bases for future operations in Afghanistan. He made these remarks during an interview with American channel HBO. Earlier, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said the US should systematically withdraw from Afghanistan to prevent anarchy, civil war and instability. Pakistan says India has violated international laws by repealing the special status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In an interview, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India unilaterally and illegally changed the valley's demographic structure. Qureshi said Islamabad suspects that India wants to convert the state's Muslim majority into a minority. The Arab coalition in Yemen says it has destroyed an explosive-laden drone launched by Houthis towards southern Saudi Arabia. In a statement, the coalition said Houthis attempted to target Khamis Mushait city in the latest strike. However, Houthis claim they have successfully targeted King Khalid Air Base in Khamis Mushait. Brazil has logged nearly 2,500 deaths from COVID-19 and more than 98,000 infections overnight. Meanwhile, Palestine has cancelled a deal with Israel to provide 1 million COVID-19 jabs as the doses were about to expire. In Pakistan, 27 people lost their lives to the virus, while nearly 1,000 tested positive in the last 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.84 million lives and infected nearly 178 million people so far. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Start from Iran, where Ibrahim Raisi, a judge who is subject to U.S. sanctions, has won the presidential election by landslide. According to the preliminary results, Raisi received over 17.8 million votes, followed by Mohsen Rezai with 3.3 million. Economist Nasir Hemati gained 2.4 million, while Amir Hossain Ghazizadeh Hashemi remained fourth, while with almost 1 million votes. The Interior Ministry data shows more than 28 million Iranians out of 59 million eligible voters cast their ballot. Conceding defeat, all other candidates, as well as Iran's current president Hassan Rouhani, have congratulated Raisi. Raisi has been Iran's judiciary chief since 2019 and has held several other posts in the country's judicial branch since the 1979 revolution. Now, for more on this, we have with us Dr. Fuad Izadi, a political analyst from Tehran. Thank you very much. Now, Fuad, as Ibrahim Raisi is labeled as an ultra-conservative, what foreign policy Iran would pursue under his rule, especially in nuclear deal revival talks and also negotiations between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. He's going to start his presidency in about 1.5 months. And since he has promised a lot in terms of improving Iran's economy, he wants to see sanctions lifted. So I don't think he would not welcome an agreement with the United States on JCPOA, the nuclear agreement. I think he would welcome it. He would also want to attract foreign investment. So he wants to create a setting where foreign investment is able to flourish inside the country. One of the promises that he made during the debates is working more with the neighborhood. Countries like Pakistan and Turkey and Iraq and others that Iran is a neighbor of. So I think you would see a more robust effort in terms of making sure that all economic and trade opportunities are exhausted when it comes to Iran's neighbors. And given the sanctions, working with the neighbors is going to be easier because of shared borders. So that's going to be one of his other priorities. Overall, he belongs to the school of thought that is generally described as the welfare state, caring for the poor and sort of looking towards the lower segments of society and taking care of that segment more. This is how the Islamic Revolution in 1979 started. And the main supporters of the revolution were the lower segments of society. So on his agenda would be helping that segment and making sure that the traditional supporters of the Islamic Republic continue to do so.
Also, Dr. Fuad, tell us, how do you see future ties between Washington and Tehran, as Raisi would be the serving Iranian president sanctioned by the US government?
Because of so many sanctions that we have, you can hardly find any top official that is not sanctioned by the United States. So, they have been sanctioning Iran for 40 years and they have run out of people to sanction. So we have some people who have been sanctioned more than once, in fact. And Iran-US relations very much depends on the United States if they want to keep the failed policies of the past, if they want to keep Trump's sanctions on Iran, if they want to put pressure on Iran to change its foreign policy or defense policy, then Iran-US relations will look like what we have it today, lots of difficulties. But they have an opportunity to change course, given the fact that all these sanctions and pressures have not worked in the last 42 years. They can change their policy towards Iran. They have an opportunity to have a clean return to the nuclear agreement without other things that they want. And if they decide to do that, then I think they will find a receptive president in Iran in the Raisi administration. But if they want to continue the old policies, I think you'll see confrontation between Iran and United States as we go forward.
And if we are talking about confrontation, lastly, considering the fact that Israel has flared up proxies against Iran, how do you view the regional security contours under Raisi?
Iran has said very clearly that Iran supports any Palestinian group that is fighting for liberation with military support. We have a number of Muslim countries that support Palestinians rhetorically. The difference between Iran is that Iran is willing and able to support them militarily, because we have seen that unless the Palestinians are able to defend themselves militarily, this occupation will continue, and there is no end to it. The apartheid state in Israel needs to end, and Iran is able and willing to help with that regard. With other neighbors, Iran's policy has been to reduce tensions and increase cooperation. Iran and Pakistan, for example, have had long-standing cultural and economic ties. And as I said, Mr. Raisi would look forward to improve those ties. Similar thing is true with regard to some of the neighbors that we have had difficulties. For example, the Saudis. Iran's foreign policy does not want to see the continuation of these tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So I think he would look forward to reducing tensions. And as you know, Iran and Saudi Arabia are talking. They have held a number of rounds of talk. So overall, I think Mr. Raisi wants to have lower tensions internationally so he can dedicate more of his time to economic problems internally.
Well, absolutely. Let's hope for Dr. Fuad Izadi, political analyst from Tehran. Thank you very much for taking out time for Indus News. Now, moving on with the news stories, Pakistan says it will not allow the US to use its military bases for future operations in Afghanistan. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan made these remarks during an interview with HBO. The host asked Khan if he will allow CIA to conduct cross-border counter-terrorism missions once the US withdraws from Afghanistan. The Prime Minister said absolutely not. Khan's remarks come amid reports that US spy agencies seek new proxies after NATO troops leave by 11th of September. Earlier, Pakistan's foreign minister said the US should systematically withdraw from Afghanistan to prevent civil war and instability there. In an interview, Shah Mahmood Qureshi warned that Afghanistan may face the situation it had experienced in the 1990s. Also, Pakistan says India has violated international laws by repealing the special status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In an interview, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India unilaterally and illegally changed the valley's demographic structure. Qureshi said Islamabad suspects that India wants to convert the state's Muslim majority into a minority. The Foreign Minister said India has ended the minimal autonomy of occupied Kashmir in August 2019. He deplored that New Delhi has put the region of around 12 million people under military siege. Moving on now, the Arab coalition in Yemen says it has destroyed an explosive-laden drone launched by Houthis towards southern Saudi Arabia. In a statement, the coalition said Houthis attempted to target Khamis Mushaid city in the latest strike. However, Houthis claim they have successfully targeted King Khalid Air Base in Khamis Mushaid. Earlier, US envoy for Yemen, Tim Lenderking, noted the need for the Yemeni government to return to the city of Aden as soon as possible. Lenderking recently returned from Saudi Arabia, where he held multiple meetings with all stakeholders. In a statement, the State Department said Lenderking highlighted the importance of swift progress in the implementation of the Riyadh Agreement. Now, the US is pulling missile defense systems, military hardware and personnel from Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Middle East. In a statement, Pentagon said some of these assets will be returned to the US for much-needed maintenance. A Pentagon spokesperson said some of them will be redeployed to other regions. The spokesperson said Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin instructed the commander of US Central Command to remove the full forces this summer. The US bolstered military footprint in Riyadh after an attack in 2019 on Aramco facilities that disrupted the global oil supply. Meanwhile, it sent Patriot missile batteries into Iraq to defend US forces following the killing of Iran's General Qasem Soleimani. Now, the US has warned that the wildfire of terrorism is sweeping across a band of Africa and needs the world's attention. US General Stephen J. Townsend made the remarks at the end of military drills with American, African and European troops. Townsend said he is concerned about the security situation across a band from the Sahel region in the west to the Horn of Africa. He noted deadly attacks by Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab and said all of them are on the march. The African Lion War Games, which lasted nearly 2 weeks, stretched across Morocco, with smaller parts held in Indonesia and Senegal. It saw more than 7,000 troops from 7 countries and NATO carry out air, land and sea exercises together. The United States has prepared contingency funds to help Ukraine in case of a possible escalation on its border with Russia. In a statement, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the idea to hold back security assistance to Ukraine is nonsense. Psaki said the U.S. provided a $150 million package of security assistance to Ukraine before Biden-Putin summit. She noted the U.S. has provided the entire amount appropriated by Congress through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. Psaki said the U.S. President reconfirmed support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity to Russian President. The summit between Russia's President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden took place in Geneva last week. Germany says the European Union should maintain dialogue with Russia despite major differences on issues. Chancellor Angela Merkel made these remarks in a press conference with French President Emmanuel Macron in Berlin. She said Russia is a big challenge for the bloc, but it is also a continental neighbor of the European Union. She noted if Brussels wants security and stability, it must maintain dialogue with Russia. Merkel also welcomed the U.S. spirit of cooperation, saying President Joe Biden brought it back to international relations.
I believe when U.S. President Joe Biden meets Russian President Vladimir Putin and holds an open dialogue, it is also important that we on the European side do the same. Only discussions allow for an insight into the other side's position, and especially in regards to Ukraine. We know that only talks in the Minsk format have any kind of chance to maybe progress in tiny steps, even though that's very difficult.
More news coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. Brazil has logged nearly 2,500 deaths from COVID-19 and more than 98,000 infections overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.8 million lives and infected nearly 178 million people so far. More about the pandemic in this report.
As Brazil's official death toll approaches 500,000, the Senate is probing whether President Jair Bolsonaro deliberately delayed securing timely supplies of vaccines. While some epidemiologists say Brazil's real figure is significantly higher. Bolsonaro argues official death toll from his own health ministry is greatly exaggerated. Over in the north, Canada has extended border restrictions on non-essential travel with U.S. until July 21st. In the U.S., President Joe Biden took a cautious victory lap as he announced that 300 million vaccine shots have been administered in the 150 days since he took office.
And the truth is that deaths and hospitalizations are drastically down in places where people are getting vaccinated. But unfortunately, cases and hospitalizations are not going down in many places in the lower vaccination rate states. They're actually going up in some places.
Italy has introduced mandatory 5-day quarantine for visitors from Britain as concerns grow over a highly contagious Delta variant that is spreading there. In the Netherlands, face masks will mostly no longer be required and other restrictions will ease from next week after a drop in cases. Meanwhile, AstraZeneca said the European Union lost a legal case over the vaccine supply as the court rejected bloc's request for more deliveries by the June end. Over in Palestine, health authorities cancelled a deal with Israel to provide 1 million COVID-19 jabs as the doses were about to expire.
After an examination by the Health Ministry staff of the first Pfizer vaccine shipment that was received today from Israel and that made up around 90,000 doses, it was found that they did not meet specifications in the agreement. Prime Minister Mohammad Shatayyeh instructed the Health Minister to cancel the vaccine exchange agreement with Israel and to return today's shipment to Israel.
In India, more than 1,600 people lost lives and over 60,000 tested positive in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, World Health Organization voiced alarm over surging cases across Africa as more contagious variants spread amid dangerously low vaccination rates.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 27 deaths from coronavirus in the last 24 hours, the lowest since March 21st. The Health Ministry says 991 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The positivity rate for the virus stands at 2.14%. The country has reported almost 22,000 deaths and over 947,000 cases since the pandemic began, of which more than 889,000 people have recovered. While over 35,000 cases are still active, the ministry says the country has administered nearly 13 million vaccine doses so far. And Pakistan joins the international community in commemorating the Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict. This International Day reaffirms the principle of the universality of all human rights which apply in conflict areas and occupied territories. In a statement, Pakistan's Foreign Office said the Kashmiri women face sexual violence at the hands of Indian forces. It said sexual violence even against children in occupied Kashmir has drastically increased since the 5th of August 2019. The office called on the international community to take note of the crimes against Kashmiris and urged India to respect United Nations resolutions. Meanwhile, the United Nations said sexual violence in conflict is an abhorrent crime that is often underreported and must end. United Nations Special Representative Pramila Patten said sexual violence has been used as a tactic of war throughout history. The UN held a virtual event in line with the 2015 resolution to express solidarity with the survivors of sexual violence. According to the United Nations, the coronavirus pandemic has further compounded the inequalities this year. Now, the United Nations has called for all member states to prevent the flow of arms into Myanmar. This is part of the UN General Assembly's non-binding resolution to condemn the military coup. The UN also urged the military to respect the November election results and release all political detainees. UN Special Envoy on Myanmar, Christine Schraner-Bergener, warned of a possible large-scale civil war. Meanwhile, Myanmar's envoy Kyaw Moe Tun regretted that the body was not more explicit about an arms embargo. The bill was supported by 119 countries, while Belarus opposed and other 36 abstained, including Russia and China. According to an advocacy group, the military has killed at least 870 civilians since it seized power on 1st of February. North Korea's Kim Jong-un has promised to navigate his country out of the economic crisis. Kim made these remarks at his party's Central Committee meeting in Pyongyang. State media says Kim has appointed new members of the powerful Politburo of the ruling Workers' Party. During early sessions, he acknowledged food shortages and urged officials to prepare for both dialogue and confrontation with the United States. Kim's remarks came as U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Sang Kim, arrived in South Korea. During his 5-day stay, he will hold talks with Japanese and South Korean counterparts over stalled nuclear diplomacy. Moving on now, Nigeria's army says a student from a group of dozens abducted from a school this week has been found dead. In a statement, an army spokesperson said troops found female student's body in the forest. It said the army has also rescued 5 students and 2 teachers after an exchange of fire with the kidnappers. The spokesperson added the troops have also recovered 800 stolen cattle. Gunmen raided the school in Kebbi State on 17th of June in the latest case of mass abductions in the region. A teacher said gunmen kidnapped more than 80 students for ransom. However, the police did not disclose the number of missing students, but said 5 teachers were abducted. Now, in Armenia, supporters of the opposition candidate Robert Kocharyan rallied ahead of a snap parliamentary elections this weekend. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan had called the early polls to end a political crisis after last year's war with Azerbaijan. Some 20,000 gathered at a central square in the capital, Yerevan, to protest against the government. A survey indicates that 28.7% of voters favor Kocharyan's Armenia Alliance and 25.2% Pashinyan's Civil Contract Party. Whoever forms a majority in parliament can elect the prime minister. Kocharyan has promised that he will start negotiations on Nagorno-Karabakh's borders if he comes to power. The United States has hailed its partnership with Poland in addressing regional and global challenges. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with his Polish counterpart, Zbigniew Rau, over the phone. The State Department says Blinken emphasized the strength of the alliance to NATO and the transatlantic community. In a statement, spokesperson Ned Price said the secretary highlighted the importance of democratic values. Price said both leaders also discussed bilateral cooperation to counter threats posed by the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. This comes as Poland looks to assume the chair of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in 2022. In the U.S. city of Oregon, police have declared dueling protests by the Proud Boys extremist group and the anti-fascist Antifa a riot. This came after clashes between the 2 groups broke out at a local park. Witnesses said it was the largest gathering of Proud Boys seen in one place this year in the city. Both sides threw pepper spray and smoke flares and used mace on counter-protesters. Police ordered both groups to leave the park after the brawl. It is not immediately clear if they made any arrests. Now, Boeing Corporation 737 MAX 10 has successfully landed at Renton Municipal Airport near Seattle after its maiden flight. The 230-seat aircraft is expected to enter service in 2023. The jet is the largest member of Boeing's best-selling single-aisle airplane family. It is designed to close the gap between Boeing's 737-9 and Airbus's A321neo in terms of seats. But its market opportunity is constrained by a range of 3,300 nautical miles short of A321neo's 4,000. Boeing has to complete the plane safety certification under tougher regulations after 2 fatal crashes of a smaller 737 MAX version. And now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. And that is all for now. For the latest update, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.